Alarms tore through the corridors of Kepler's hold, and Mara Bennett dropped the tool in her hand before it even finished ringing. Red light pulsed along the walls. Somewhere above her, through 3 layers of reinforced hull, something enormous had just entered the outer sensor net, and every screen in the station was screaming about it. She ran, not toward safety, because there was no such place left on this station, but toward the control deck, where she knew Commander Aidan Cole would already be standing over the main display, jaw tight, eyes fixed on numbers that could not possibly be good. She was right. "Confirm that count again," Cole said, not turning around as she entered. His voice was flat, the way it always was when he was holding back something worse. "Confirmed," answered the officer at the sensor station, a young man named Ellis Marsh, whose hands were shaking slightly on the console. 3,112 signatures, Dominion configuration, full invasion pattern. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the station's failing life support. Mara felt her stomach drop. 3,000 ships. Kepler's hold had 41, and most of those were transport vessels never built for a fight. "Time to arrival?" Cole asked. 71 hours. 3 days. 3 days until the last free station in the galaxy became one more grave among thousands. Mara had grown up hearing about the Dominion the way children elsewhere might hear about storms or floods, some distant thing that happened to other people. Then it happened to her people. She was 11 when the first refugee ships arrived at Kepler's hold, carrying survivors from a colony called Esser's Reach. She remembered their faces, empty, most of them, as if something had been scooped out and never replaced. Now she was 26, an engineer who kept the station's failing reactor core from tearing itself apart, and she was about to watch the same thing happen to her home. "Options," Cole said, addressing the room now. Around him stood the remains of the station's command staff, Director Lucas Hartley, a heavy-set man who had once run trade routes across 6 systems and now ran a dying outpost with the same tired determination. Grace Sutton, the head of station defense, still favoring her left leg from an injury that had never properly healed, and a handful of junior officers who looked far too young for what was being asked of them. "We surrender," Hartley said quietly. "We open the gates. Maybe they take what they want and leave the rest of us alone." "They don't leave anyone alone," Sutton snapped. "You know that. Esser's Reach surrendered. Calder's Point surrendered. There's nothing left of either place but debris fields." "Then what do you suggest?" Hartley shot back. "We have 41 ships. They have 3,000. This isn't a battle. It's a formality." Mara stood near the back of the room, feeling smaller with every word. She had spent the last 2 years telling herself that Kepler's hold would be different, that somehow the last refuge would hold when nothing else had. Standing here now, listening to the people in charge argue about which kind of ending to choose, that hope felt foolish. "There has to be something," she said, before she could stop herself. Every head turned toward her. She was not used to being noticed in rooms like this. "There isn't," Hartley said, not unkindly. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. Some fights are already decided before they begin." Cole held up a hand. "Wait." He was staring at the display again, but something had changed in his expression. Marsh was leaning over his console, frowning at a new reading. "Sir, I'm picking up something else," Marsh said. "Not Dominion. It just came out of deep space. No drive trail, no approach vector I can track. It's just there." "Define there," Cole said. "One vessel. Bearing 317, distance 200,000 kilometers. And sir, its size reading is larger than anything in our database. Larger than a Dominion command ship." The room shifted instantly. Fear turned into something sharper, more immediate. Another threat, arriving even before the one already coming. "Could it be an advanced scout for the invasion fleet?" Sutton asked. "Its signature doesn't match anything Dominion," Marsh said. "It doesn't match anything at all." Mara moved closer to the display, drawn by something she couldn't name. On the screen, a single icon blinked steadily, where nothing should have been. No flotilla, no support ships, no visible weapons charging, just one enormous shape, drifting quietly at the edge of the system, as though it had always belonged there. "Hail it," Cole ordered. Marsh worked the console. Long seconds passed. The silence stretched thin enough to hear the station's ventilation system rattling somewhere behind the walls. No response. Marsh finally said. But sir, I'm reading life signs aboard. A crew compliment. It looks human. That single word landed differently than anything else said in the room that day. Human. Out here, at the ragged edge of everything, past the point where any human colony fleet had ever been recorded traveling, past the point where anyone believed people like them still existed. That's not possible, Hartley said. I'm just reading what the sensors give me, Marsh replied. Cole straightened, some old instinct pulling him upright the way it might have during his years commanding a real fleet, before the Dominion had reduced that fleet to scrap and memory. Get me a shuttle crew. I want eyes on that ship before it decides to make the first move. Sir, with respect, Sutton said. If that thing is hostile, sending a shuttle out is a good way to lose people we can't afford to lose. If it's hostile, Cole said, we're already losing everyone in 71 hours. I'd rather know what we're facing. Mara surprised herself again. I want to go. Cole looked at her properly for the first time since she'd entered the room. This isn't an engineering assignment, Miss Bennett. If that ship is real, if it's actually running on technology we've never seen, you're going to need someone who can read a reactor core faster than anyone else on this station. That's me. I kept ours alive through 2 meltdown scares that should have killed us both. Let me look at theirs. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then something in his face softened, just slightly, the way it did when he remembered that everyone left on this station had already survived more than most people ever should. Fine, he said. Suit up, you're on the shuttle. 20 minutes later, Mara sat strapped into a jump seat aboard a battered transport shuttle, watching through the narrow viewport as Kepler's hold shrank behind them, its lights flickering like something already dying. Beside her sat 2 armed escorts, both silent, both watching the darkness ahead with the wary stillness of people who had learned not to trust anything they hadn't seen with their own eyes. The unidentified ship came into view slowly, and then all at once, the way distant things in space always seem to. First a shape barely different from the stars around it, then a silhouette, then something so large it swallowed the shuttle's entire forward window. Mara had studied every known warship design in the archives, every Dominion cruiser, every surviving fragment of old human military records. Nothing matched what floated in front of her now. The hull was dark, almost matte, patterned with lines of faint light that pulsed slowly, like something breathing. It didn't look built so much as grown, every surface curved and deliberate, in a way that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Awe, maybe. Or fear. Possibly both. That's not Dominion, one of the escorts muttered. That's not anything. As the shuttle drew closer, a section of the massive hull split open without sound, light spilling out into the void, forming a landing bay large enough to swallow 3 shuttles at once. No hail, no instructions, just an open door, waiting. They want us to come in, the pilot said, voice tight. Mara felt her pulse hammering as the shuttle drifted forward into the bay, the enormous doors sealing behind them with a low groan of unfamiliar machinery. When the outer atmosphere cycled and the shuttle's hatch finally opened, she was the first one out of her seat, curiosity overpowering the fear that any sensible person would have felt in that moment. The bay around them was vast, lit with the same slow, pulsing light as the hull outside. Rows of vessels lined the walls, smaller ships built with the same strange, organic design language, clearly military, but unlike anything from any known era of human shipbuilding. And standing at the center of the bay, waiting without a single weapon raised, was a woman. She looked to be in her 40s, though something about her bearing suggested far more years than that, the kind of weight in her eyes that came from decisions no one should have to make more than once in a lifetime. Her uniform was plain, dark, marked with symbols Mara didn't recognize. Behind her stood a small honor guard, silent and watchful. You're further from home than you think, the woman said, her voice carrying easily across the bay. I'm Captain Elena Voss. This is the reckoning. Mara found her voice first, though it came out smaller than she intended. You're human. Something like a tired smile crossed Voss's face. So are you. Funny how that still surprises people, out here. How is that possible? One of the escorts asked. There's no record of any colony fleet passing through this sector. Ever. There's a lot the old records don't have, Voss said. My people left known space generations ago. We found things out there, fought things out there. Some of what we found built this ship." She gestured slightly, taking in the vast bay around them. "We've been listening to your signals for the last several days. We know what's coming toward your station." Mara's throat tightened. "Then you know we don't have much time." "I do," Voss said. Her gaze moved over the small delegation, lingering for a moment on Mara, before returning to the escort at the front. "Take me to your commander. We should talk before that fleet arrives, not after, because if we wait until after, there won't be anything left worth talking about." She turned, already walking toward a waiting transport at the edge of the bay, expecting them to follow, and as Mara fell into step behind her, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember. Not certainty, not safety, but the smallest, fragile edge of a chance. The transport carried them through corridors that seemed to shift color as they passed, walls lit by the same slow pulse Mara had seen on the outer hull. She counted crew members as they moved deeper into the ship, noting how few there were for a vessel this size. Every face she passed looked weathered in the same way as Voss, marked by years spent somewhere far harder than anywhere Mara had known. They reached what appeared to be a command chamber, circular, with a massive display floating at its center showing a slowly rotating map of the system. Kepler's hold blinked at one edge. The Dominion fleet, still days away, crawled steadily closer at the other. Commander Cole was already waiting there when Mara arrived, having taken a separate shuttle ahead of her group. His expression was unreadable, caught somewhere between suspicion and desperate hope. "Captain Voss," he said, extending a hand that she did not immediately take. "You'll forgive me if I'm not entirely trusting of a ship that appears out of nowhere 3 days before an invasion fleet." "I'd be more worried if you were," Voss said. She studied him for a long moment, before finally shaking his hand. "You've held this station a long time, Commander. Longer than most places manage against the Dominion." "We've been lucky." "No," Voss said. "You've been stubborn. Luck runs out. Stubbornness is the only thing that's kept you alive this long, and it's the only thing that's going to matter over the next 3 days." Cole gestured toward the display. "Then perhaps you can explain how one ship, however impressive, is supposed to help against 3,000. Voss walked to the center of the room, studying the slowly rotating map with the practiced eye of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out more times than she cared to count. "This ship isn't just one ship, Commander. It's the result of technology my people recovered from a civilization that was wiped out by something even worse than the Dominion, a very long time ago. We didn't build it from nothing, we inherited it, and we spent generations learning how to use it properly." "What civilization?" Mara asked before she could stop herself. Voss glanced at her, something flickering behind her eyes, an old grief carefully contained. "One that doesn't exist anymore. That's usually how these stories end, if you don't fight hard enough, soon enough." She turned back to the display, pulling up new information with a gesture, data streams Mara couldn't fully interpret, but that clearly meant something significant to the room's other occupants. Weapon configurations, shield harmonics, numbers that made Sutton, who had followed a moment behind Cole, let out a low whistle. "That's not possible," Sutton said, staring at the output. "Those numbers aren't possible." "They are," Voss said simply. "This ship alone could likely handle a third of that invasion fleet, without significant damage. But a third isn't enough. The Dominion doesn't send fleets to lose. If we engage them head-on with the Reckoning alone, we might slow them down. We won't stop them." "Then what are you offering?" Cole asked, some of the hostility fading from his voice, replaced by something more urgent. "A chance," Voss said. "Not a guarantee. I've learned the hard way never to promise more than that." She explained, then, in careful and measured terms, what she believed could be done. The Reckoning's weapons and shielding were beyond anything the Dominion had encountered from human forces before, but the ship needed support, coordination, and above all, time to properly integrate with the station's remaining defense grid. She spoke of drawing the Dominion fleet into a specific approach corridor, one where the station's remaining 41 ships, weak as they were individually, could be positioned to maximize the damage they dealt while minimizing their exposure. She spoke of using the station itself as a weapon, its outer defense platforms repurposed and pushed beyond their original design limits. "It's aggressive," Cole said when she finished. It puts everyone at risk from the first moment of contact. Everyone is already at risk, Voss said. The only question is whether that risk buys you anything in return. Hartley, who had remained quiet through most of the exchange, finally spoke. And if we refuse? If we choose surrender instead? Something changed in Voss's expression, a flicker of old, exhausted pain that told Mara this wasn't a hypothetical question for her. Not really. Then you'll die anyway. Only slower, and with less dignity. I've seen what the Dominion does to worlds that surrender. I watched it happen to my own people, generations ago, before we learned better. Surrender doesn't buy mercy from something that doesn't understand the concept. The room fell silent. Mara found herself watching Voss closely, trying to read the story behind those careful, guarded words. There was history there, deep and painful, the kind that shaped a person permanently. Tell us about your people, Mara said quietly. If we're going to trust you with everything we have left, I think we deserve to know who we're trusting. Voss studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much of the truth she was willing to share. Finally she nodded, gesturing for the group to sit at the chamber's central table. Centuries ago, she began, before this station existed, before most of what you know as human civilization out here existed, a colony fleet left known space, looking for new worlds beyond Dominion territory. My ancestors were on those ships. We found a system far from anything mapped, settled it, built something we believed could last. For a while, it did. What happened? Mara asked. Something came for us. Not the Dominion, not at first. Something older, something the Dominion itself seems to fear, based on what we've learned since. It wasn't a fleet. It was almost like a disease, spreading through entire systems, consuming everything organic in its path. We fought it for years, lost most of what we'd built, lost most of our people. Voss's voice remained steady, but something beneath it trembled, barely perceptible. We survived by finding the remains of an even older civilization, one that had apparently faced the same enemy long before us, and lost. Their technology was still intact, buried in ruins, scattered across their old systems. We learned to use it. We built ships like this one. We turned the tide, eventually, and drove the threat back into whatever dark corner of the galaxy it came from. And the Dominion? Cole asked. We encountered them afterward, expanding into the same space we'd claimed. By then we understood how to fight, how to survive against overwhelming odds. We've spent generations doing exactly that, moving from system to system, helping where we can, staying ahead of the same fate that's chasing all of you now. Voss looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes in turn. We picked up your station's distress signals days ago. I could have kept moving. There are other places out there that need help too. But something about your situation reminded me of where we started, a long time ago. One station, refusing to fall, even when it seemed like the smartest choice was to give up. Mara felt something tighten in her chest, a mixture of hope and grief, so intertwined she couldn't separate them. So, you came here to help us fight. I came here to give you a chance to fight, Voss corrected gently. The rest is up to you. Cole studied the display again, the slow crawl of the Dominion fleet, a constant, silent countdown behind every word being spoken in the room. If we agree to your plan, what do you need from us? Full cooperation, Voss said. Every ship, every defense platform, every capable pilot and technician this station has. My crew will need to work directly with yours to integrate our systems in time. There's no room for hesitation once we commit. The Dominion won't give us a second chance to adjust our strategy mid-battle. And if it doesn't work? Hartley asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier certainty. Then we go down fighting, together, instead of separately, Voss said. I won't pretend that's a comforting answer. It's the only honest one I have. Silence stretched through the chamber. Mara watched Cole's face, watched the years of accumulated exhaustion and responsibility play across it, as he weighed a decision that would determine the fate of everyone under his command. Finally he straightened, some of the old fire returning to his posture. All right, he said. We fight. Voss nodded, something like relief passing briefly across her features, before the careful composure returned. Then we don't have much time. I want my engineering team working alongside yours within the hour, starting with your reactor systems and defense grid. Her eyes moved to Mara. "I understand you're the one who's kept this station's core stable through 2 near meltdowns." "That's right," Mara said, surprised to be singled out. "Good. I want you working directly with my chief engineer. If anyone here can keep up with what we're about to attempt, it's someone who already knows how to hold a dying system together." For the first time since the alarms had sounded hours earlier, Mara felt something other than fear settle into her chest. Purpose, maybe, or the beginning of it. As the meeting broke apart and preparations began in earnest, Mara found herself standing near the chamber's viewport, looking out at the distant, crawling lights of the approaching Dominion fleet. 70 hours remained, less now than when the day had begun. Somewhere out there, an enemy that had erased 100 worlds was coming for the 101st. But for the first time since she was 11 years old, and watching broken refugees stumble off transport ships, she let herself believe that this time, the ending might be different. Beside her, Voss appeared quietly, following her gaze out toward the darkness. "It's always hardest right before," she said. "The waiting, the not knowing." "How do you stand it?" Mara asked. "Doing this again and again, every time you find somewhere new." Voss was quiet for a long moment. "You remember why you're doing it," she finally said, "and you remember the places where you didn't get there in time. That's usually enough to keep moving forward, even when it's the hardest thing in the world." Mara nodded slowly, understanding settling over her like a weight she hadn't expected to carry, and yet somehow felt ready for. Whatever came next, whatever the following days demanded of her, she would meet it standing, not kneeling. The countdown continued behind them, indifferent to hope or fear alike, and the work of preparing for war began. Work on Kepler's hold shifted overnight from routine survival to something closer to controlled panic, though no one called it that out loud. Mara barely slept in the first 12 hours after returning from the reckoning, moving instead between the station's failing reactor core and the makeshift integration lab that had been set up in one of the old cargo bays, where technicians from both crews worked side by side under flickering lights. Her counterpart from the reckoning was a quiet, precise man named Callum Reyes, whose hands moved over unfamiliar consoles with the confidence of someone who had done this exact kind of desperate, last-minute engineering more times than he probably wanted to remember. He didn't waste words, didn't offer comfort, just steady instruction, and the occasional grunt of approval when Mara caught onto something quickly. "Your reactor's stable," he said, studying the readouts on the 3rd day of preparation, "but it wasn't built for what we're about to ask of it. We need to route additional power through your defense grid without destabilizing containment. That means rebuilding half your regulatory system by hand, in under 2 days." "Then we'd better get started," Mara said, already reaching for a toolkit. They worked in near silence for hours at a stretch, broken only by short functional exchanges about power thresholds and containment margins. Mara found herself grateful for the focus it demanded. It left no room for the fear that kept trying to creep in at the edges of every quiet moment, the countdown that never stopped ticking in the back of her mind. Elsewhere on the station, similar scenes played out. Sutton oversaw the retrofitting of the station's aging defense platforms, guided by specifications provided by the Reckoning's tactical officers. Weapons systems pushed well beyond their original design tolerances, in ways that made the older engineers nervous, and the younger ones cautiously excited. Cole spent most of his waking hours in continuous conference with Voss, mapping out the exact sequence of maneuvers that would determine whether the coming battle ended in survival or annihilation. Mara caught glimpses of Voss throughout those frantic days, always moving, always focused, carrying the weight of command with a steadiness that seemed almost inhuman, until Mara noticed the small signs otherwise. The way her hand sometimes lingered too long on a console before she moved on, the way her eyes occasionally lost focus for half a second, somewhere far away, before snapping back to the present. On the evening of the 2nd day, with less than 20 hours remaining before the Dominion fleet's projected arrival, Mara found herself taking a rare break in one of the station's observation decks, staring out at the stars with a cup of lukewarm synthetic coffee she barely remembered pouring. She wasn't surprised when Voss appeared beside her a few minutes later, though she hadn't heard her approach. "You should be resting," Voss said, though there was no real command in her voice, just quiet observation. "So should you," Mara replied. A faint, tired smile crossed Voss's face. Fair enough. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the distant stars, each one a reminder of how small this single station truly was, against the scale of everything surrounding it. Can I ask you something? Can I ask you something? Can I ask you something? Mara said eventually. You can ask. Do you think we're going to survive this? Voss was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful weight she seemed to give everything. Honestly, I don't know. I've learned not to make promises about outcomes I can't control. What I can tell you is that we've given ourselves a real chance, better than most places ever get. That has to count for something. Does it get easier? Mara asked. Doing this over and over? No, Voss said simply. It doesn't, you just get better at carrying it. Mara studied her for a moment, seeing past the composed exterior to something rawer underneath. Something that had clearly been carried a very long way, across a very long time.
How many times have you done this before?
Arrived somewhere just before the end, tried to change what was coming. Voss's jaw tightened slightly. More times than I can count anymore. Sometimes we make it in time. Sometimes we don't. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped lower, quieter. There was a colony, a few years back, smaller than this station. Further out on the edge of Dominion expansion, we arrived 4 hours too late. 4 hours. She shook her head slowly. I still think about that sometimes. What 4 hours might have changed? Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, simply standing beside her, in the quiet observation deck, letting the weight of the confession settle between them, without trying to smooth it over with empty reassurance. Thank you, Mara finally said, for not being 4 hours too late this time. Voss glanced at her, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Voss's communicator, and whatever brief moment of vulnerability had opened between them, closed again, as she straightened. All business once more. Integration testing's ready on your end. Reyes wants you back in the lab. Mara nodded, setting down her half-finished coffee. As she turned to leave, Voss spoke once more, quiet enough that Mara almost missed it. For what it's worth, Mara Bennett, you've got good instincts. Better than most people I've watched try to keep up with this kind of work under this kind of pressure. It wasn't much, but it settled something in Mara's chest regardless. A small, steady warmth against the mounting dread of the hours ahead. The final stretch of preparation moved in a blur after that. Systems were tested and retested. Pilots ran drills in simulators hastily configured with the Reckoning's provided battle data, learning unfamiliar formations designed to maximize the effectiveness of the station's outnumbered forces. Sutton's defense platforms came online one by one, their weapons humming with power levels no one on the station had ever seen them reach before. Cole called a final briefing 8 hours before the Dominion fleet's projected arrival, gathering every ship captain, defense officer, and department head into the station's largest remaining assembly hall. Voss stood beside him, the two of them presenting a unified plan that had, over the last 3 days, gone from desperate theory to carefully rehearsed strategy. The Dominion fleet will enter the system through this corridor, Cole said, gesturing to the display floating above the assembly, based on every previous invasion pattern we've recorded. That predictability is the only real advantage we have. We're going to use it. Voss took over, her voice carrying easily across the silent hall. The Reckoning will engage the lead elements of their fleet directly, drawing their formation into a tighter approach than they'd normally use. That's when your platforms and ships come in, striking their flanks while their attention is fixed forward. We're not trying to win a straight fight. We're trying to make them fight the battle we've chosen, instead of the one they planned. Questions followed, sharp and anxious, from officers who understood exactly how much was riding on a plan built in under 3 days. Voss and Cole answered each one carefully, patiently, never pretending the plan was without risk, never promising more certainty than they actually had. Near the back of the hall, Mara stood among the other engineering staff, watching the room full of tired, frightened, determined faces, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel again after the alarms first sounded 3 days earlier. Not just hope, but something closer to belief, a conviction that this station, this ragged collection of survivors and refugees, might actually stand a chance against the thing that had erased everything else in its path. As the briefing ended and the hall began to empty, people moving toward their final assigned stations with grim determination, Mara caught sight of Reyes waiting near the exit, his expression unusually serious. "Core's stable," he said as she approached. "Better than stable, actually. You did good work these last 3 days." "We did good work," Mara corrected. Reyes leaned back against the console, studying her with an expression that had softened considerably over the last 3 days of shared, exhausting work. "You know, when I first came aboard this station, I expected to find engineers barely holding together outdated equipment with spare parts and stubbornness. That's mostly what I found, but your instincts are sharper than most people I've trained back home." "Is that a compliment?" Mara asked, surprised. "It's an observation," Reyes said. "Voss doesn't usually take this much interest in someone outside her own crew. She sees something in you worth paying attention to." Mara considered that for a moment, unsure how to respond. "I just want this station to survive. That's all this has ever been about for me." "That's usually where it starts for everyone," Reyes said, "the wanting to survive. What happens after that is what separates people. Some folks fold under the weight of it. Others find something steadier inside themselves they didn't know was there." He straightened, gathering a small toolkit from the console beside him. "For what it's worth, I think you're the second kind." Mara didn't know how to respond to that either, so she simply nodded, filing the words away somewhere she suspected she'd return to later, once there was time enough to properly feel anything beyond the immediate, grinding pressure of preparation. Reyes allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Get some rest if you can. Real rest, not the kind where you tell yourself you're resting while running numbers in your head. Whatever's coming in the next 8 hours, you're going to need everything you've got left." Mara nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily, not with the Dominion fleet drawing steadily closer with every passing minute, not with the weight of everything the next few hours would demand pressing down on her chest like something physical. She made her way back through the station's corridors, past refugees gathered in makeshift shelters, past children too young to fully understand what was coming, clutching whatever small comforts their families had managed to carry with them, across 100 desperate journeys. She thought of Esser's reach, of the empty faces she'd seen as a child, of everything Kepler's hold had absorbed and survived over the years since. This station had already outlasted so much. Tonight, it would either outlast the worst threat it had ever faced, or it would join the long list of places the Dominion had erased from existence. Mara found her way to a small, quiet corner near the station's central hub and allowed herself, finally, to sit down and simply breathe, gathering whatever strength remained for what was still to come. Somewhere above her, through layers of hull and steel, the reckoning waited in silence, alongside Kepler's hold's remaining 41 ships, every system primed, every plan finalized. 8 hours remained. Then the Dominion fleet would arrive, and everything they had built over the last 3 desperate days would be tested against an enemy that had never once been stopped before. Mara closed her eyes, and for a brief, fragile moment, allowed herself to hope that this time, finally, that record might change. The first Dominion signature appeared on Kepler's hold sensors 2 hours ahead of schedule, and every plan built over 3 desperate days suddenly compressed into a fraction of the time anyone had prepared for. Mara felt the shift the moment the station-wide alert sounded, a different tone than before, sharper, final. "They're early." Marsh's voice crackled over the comm system, tight with barely controlled panic. "All stations, this is not a drill. Enemy fleet inbound. Revised arrival in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Mara abandoned whatever fragile rest she'd managed to find and sprinted toward the reactor core, meeting Reyes there moments later, both of them falling immediately into the practiced rhythm they'd built over the last 3 days. "Power distribution's holding," Reyes said, scanning the readouts with quick, precise movements. "We push it live the moment Cole gives the order." "It'll hold," Mara said, more to steady her own nerves than to reassure him. "It has to." Across the station, similar scenes unfolded in rapid succession. Sutton's voice cut through the comm channels, directing defense platforms into their final positions. Her tone clipped and controlled despite the chaos surrounding her. Pilots scrambled toward their ships, strapping into cockpits that had, until 3 days ago, never been intended for anything resembling real combat. Refugees were moved deeper into the station's shielded core, families huddling together in cramped corridors, listening to the growing tension in every announcement broadcast through the walls around them. Aboard the Reckoning, preparations moved with the same urgent precision. Voss stood at the center of her command chamber, watching the Dominion fleet's rapidly closing signatures with an expression that gave away nothing except absolute focus. "They know something's different this time," she said to Cole, whose image floated on a display beside her, connected directly from Kepler's Hold's own command center. Their approach vectors shifted. They're not following the standard pattern anymore. "Can we still use the corridor plan?" Cole asked, tension audible beneath his controlled tone. "We adapt," Voss said. "We don't have another option at this point." The Dominion fleet arrived in full 68 minutes later, emerging from the darkness in a formation that stretched across an unimaginable expanse of space. Thousands of vessels moving with the eerie, coordinated precision of a single organism rather than a collection of individual ships. Every screen on Kepler's Hold lit up with the overwhelming scale of it, and for a moment, silence fell across the entire station as everyone absorbed the true size of what they were facing. "All ships, hold position," Cole's voice rang out across every channel. "Wait for my mark." The Reckoning moved first, sliding forward from its position near the station, alone against the vast approaching wall of enemy vessels. Mara watched the display in the integration lab, her hands hovering over controls she barely dared to touch, as the massive ship advanced steadily toward an enemy force that outnumbered it by a margin too large to properly comprehend. "Here we go," Reyes muttered beside her. The Reckoning opened fire first, and the resulting display of power made every simulation they'd run over the last 3 days look like a pale imitation of the real thing. Beams of concentrated energy lanced out from the ship's forward batteries, tearing through the leading edge of the Dominion formation with devastating precision. Ships broke apart in silent flashes of light, their destruction visible even from Kepler's Hold's distant sensors. But the Dominion fleet did not falter, did not scatter in confusion the way any lesser force might have. It simply adjusted, flowing around the damage, like water finding a new path, thousands of vessels compensating instantly for the loss of dozens. Around the station, the remaining 41 ships held their positions with visible difficulty, pilots gripping their controls as the sheer scale of the enemy formation filled every available screen. A young pilot named Owen Priestley, flying one of the station's older interceptors, found his hands trembling despite months of drills that had never prepared him for the reality of facing an enemy this vast. Beside him on the comm channel, a woman named Faye Ashworth kept her voice steady, calling out formation adjustments with the calm authority of someone who had trained her entire adult life for a moment she'd hoped would never actually come. "Hold formation," Ashworth said. "Wait for Cole's mark. We break early, we die early." Priestley swallowed hard, forcing his hands to steady against the controls. "Copy that." "They're not slowing down," Sutton's voice reported, tension bleeding through every word. "Formation's tightening around the Reckoning. They're trying to surround it." "That's what we want," Cole said. "Hold positions. Wait for the signal." Mara watched the display with her heart hammering against her ribs, understanding on some visceral level that everyone aboard Kepler's Hold was now witnessing something that would either save them or doom them, playing out in real time on a scale too vast to fully process. The Reckoning continued its assault, weapons blazing, shields flaring bright against a storm of returning fire that would have vaporized any other ship in the sector within seconds. Voss's voice came through steady across the command channel, directing her ship through maneuvers that seemed to defy the laws of conventional warfare, weaving between incoming fire with a precision that spoke of countless previous battles fought exactly like this one. "Now," Cole finally said, and the word carried across every channel on the station like a physical release of tension that had been building for days. Kepler's Hold's remaining 41 ships surged forward from their concealed positions along the flanks of the approaching Dominion formation, weapons systems overcharged well past their original design limits, striking with a coordinated fury that caught the enemy fleet's attention exactly where Voss and Cole had planned. Defense platforms across the station's outer hull opened fire simultaneously, adding their newly retrofitted power to the assault. For a brief, breathless moment, it seemed to be working. Dominion ships broke apart under the concentrated crossfire, their formation buckling slightly, as the unexpected flanking assault forced a redistribution of their attention and firepower. Then the true scale of the Dominion's numbers began to assert itself. "We're taking heavy damage on the eastern flank," Sutton reported, strain evident in her voice. "Platform 7 is down. Platform 9 reporting critical damage." Mara watched helplessly from the integration lab as the battle unfolded across the display. Ships she recognized, ships crewed by people she'd known her entire life, absorbing damage that no amount of retrofitted weaponry could fully compensate for against such overwhelming numbers. "Core's holding," Reyes said beside her, though his voice carried a new tightness as he monitored the reactor's output. "But we're pushing past safe thresholds. If this keeps up much longer." "It has to hold," Mara said, hands moving instinctively across the console, making minute adjustments to the containment field as it strained under the demands being placed upon it. Priestley's squadron struck the eastern flank of the Dominion formation exactly as briefed, weapons scoring hits against enemy hulls that would have been impossible with the Interceptor's original systems. For a few brief, exhilarating moments, it felt almost like winning. Then a concentrated burst of return fire tore through the formation, and Priestley watched 2 ships from his own squadron vanish from his display in the space of a single breath. Ashworth's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the loss, redirecting the remaining pilots into a tighter defensive pattern, refusing to let grief slow the fight even for a moment it couldn't afford. The battle raged on for what felt like hours but was, according to the station's chronometer, barely 20 minutes. The reckoning tore through wave after wave of Dominion vessels, its weapons and shields performing exactly as Voss had promised, but even that overwhelming power began to show signs of strain against an enemy that seemed to have an endless supply of ships willing to throw themselves into the fight. "Captain Voss," Cole's voice cut through the command channel, urgency replacing his earlier composure. "We're losing ships faster than projected. If this continues at current rate, we won't have a fleet left in another 20 minutes. Mara couldn't hear Voss's reply, but she could see the immediate shift in the Reckoning's movement on the display, the massive ship changing course, driving deeper into the heart of the Dominion formation, rather than continuing its more measured engagement along the edges. "What's she doing?" Reyes asked, watching the same display. "I don't know," Mara said, though something in her chest tightened with a mixture of fear and understanding. "But I don't think it's part of the original plan." Across the station, similar confusion rippled through every command channel as the Reckoning's aggressive new trajectory became apparent, cutting directly toward what sensor analysis identified as the Dominion fleet's central command structure, a cluster of larger vessels coordinating the overall assault. "She's trying to hit their command ships directly," Sutton said, disbelief evident in her voice. "That's not the plan. That's not anything close to the plan." Mara found herself gripping the edge of her console, watching helplessly as the Reckoning plunged deeper into the densest concentration of enemy fire, its shields flaring under an onslaught that would have destroyed any lesser vessel instantly. Around it, Kepler's Hold's remaining ships continued their own desperate fight along the flanks, buying whatever time they could while the massive vessel pursued its increasingly dangerous course. "Come on," Mara whispered, unsure if she was speaking to Voss, to the ship, or simply to whatever fragile hope remained in the room around her. "Come on." The reactor core trembled beneath her hands, pushed further past its limits than it had ever been designed to withstand, and somewhere out in the darkness beyond the station's hull, the fate of everyone aboard Kepler's Hold hung suspended in the balance of a battle that had, in the span of a few desperate minutes, become far more uncertain than anyone had dared to imagine. The Reckoning tore through the heart of the Dominion formation like something unstoppable, its shields flashing brighter with every impact absorbed, weapons firing in continuous punishing arcs that left ruined hulks tumbling in its wake. Voss stood at the center of her command chamber, hands steady on the controls despite the violence unfolding around her ship. Her focus narrowed entirely to the cluster of command vessels growing larger on her forward display. "Captain, shield integrity at 62% and falling," a voice reported from somewhere behind her, tight with barely restrained alarm. "Hold the line," Voss said, voice level, despite the storm of fire surrounding them. "We're almost there." The Dominion's command vessels loomed ahead, 3 massive ships arranged in a tight defensive formation, coordinating the movements of the fleet around them, with the cold, mechanical precision that had made the Dominion an unstoppable force across 100 conquered systems. Voss had studied that formation pattern for years, had watched it repeat itself across battlefield after battlefield, always the same underlying weakness hidden beneath the overwhelming numbers. Break the coordination. Break the fleet. Full power to forward batteries, she ordered. Target the central command vessel. Everything we've got. The reckoning surged forward, absorbing a punishing wave of return fire that sent alarms blaring throughout the ship, systems flickering, as the strain pushed past what any reasonable design should have been able to withstand. But the ship held, its hybrid technology drawn from a civilization that had faced this exact kind of overwhelming threat and found a way to survive it, refusing to break beneath the assault. The forward batteries fired in a continuous blinding stream, tearing into the Dominion's central command vessel with concentrated fury. For a moment, nothing happened, the massive ship's own shields absorbing the punishment with the same eerie resilience that had characterized every Dominion vessel Voss had ever faced. Then, something gave way. The command ship's shields collapsed in a cascading failure, and the Reckoning's continued barrage tore into the exposed hull beneath, ripping through decks and systems in a growing chain of secondary explosions that spread rapidly across the vessel's entire structure. Moments later, the ship broke apart entirely, a blossoming flash of light and debris scattering across the battlefield. Across the entire Dominion formation, something shifted immediately and visibly. Ships that had moved with flawless, coordinated precision suddenly hesitated, their movements becoming fractured and uncertain as the loss of central coordination rippled outward through the fleet. Their formations breaking apart, Sutton's voice reported from Kepler's hold, disbelief evident even through the tension of the ongoing battle. Captain Voss, whatever you just did, it's working. Their coordination is falling apart across multiple sectors. Voss allowed herself a fraction of a second to feel the fragile beginnings of hope before turning her attention to the remaining 2 command vessels, still defended by a dense screen of escort ships, determined to prevent the Reckoning from repeating its devastating strike. Second target, bearing 042. We're not finished yet. Back aboard Kepler's hold, the shift in the battle's momentum became immediately apparent across every display. Dominion ships that had been pressing the station's flanks with relentless coordination began breaking into smaller, less organized groups, their attacks growing scattered and inconsistent as the loss of central command rippled through their ranks. Now's our chance, Cole said, watching the shifting battle unfold with careful, calculating intensity. All remaining ships, concentrate fire on the disorganized clusters. Don't let them regroup. Kepler's hold's surviving vessels surged forward with renewed purpose, striking at the fragmented remnants of the Dominion fleet with a coordinated fury that finally began to match the desperate hope that had carried the station through the last 3 days of frantic preparation. Ships that had been struggling to survive against overwhelming odds now found themselves capable of striking real, meaningful damage against an enemy whose greatest strength, unwavering coordination, had been fundamentally broken. Mara watched the shifting tide of battle from the integration lab, hands still moving across the reactor controls, monitoring readings that continued to strain against their absolute limits even as hope began, cautiously, to take root in her chest. It's working, Rhea said beside her, staring at the display with something between disbelief and cautious relief. It's actually working. Don't jinx it, Mara said, though she couldn't fully suppress the small, fragile smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Aboard the Reckoning, the fight for the second command vessel proved far more costly than the first. The remaining Dominion escorts, perhaps recognizing the catastrophic threat the Reckoning now posed to their entire fleet's cohesion, threw themselves into a desperate, concentrated defense, their combined fire finally beginning to overwhelm even the massive ship's formidable shields. Shields at 30%, the same tense voice reported from behind Voss. Captain, we need to consider disengagement. Not yet, Voss said, though even she could feel the ship trembling beneath the accumulated punishment, systems flickering and failing across multiple decks as the strain finally began to show. One more push. The Reckoning drove forward through a storm of concentrated fire, weapons blazing against the second command vessel's defenses, absorbing damage that sent entire sections of the ship into emergency lockdown as containment failures spread through its outer decks. Voss gripped the edge of her console, watching her ship's shields continue to fail, even as its weapons tore relentlessly into the enemy vessel ahead. The second command ship broke apart, in much the same way as the first, its destruction sending another wave of confusion rippling through the already fractured Dominion formation. But the cost had been severe. Alarms blared continuously throughout the reckoning now, damage reports flooding in from every deck, and Voss could feel her ship's remaining strength fading with every passing second. "Third target's pulling back," a tactical officer reported, urgency evident in his voice. "It's retreating deeper into the remaining fleet formation. We don't have the shield strength left to pursue." Voss studied the tactical display, weighing the ship's rapidly deteriorating condition against the momentum they'd built over the last several devastating minutes. 2 of the 3 command vessels destroyed, the Dominion fleet fractured into disorganized clusters, Kepler's Hold's remaining ships pressing their advantage with everything they had left. "Pull us back," she finally said. "We've done what we came to do. Let the rest of the fleet finish this." The reckoning withdrew from the heart of the battle, its damaged systems struggling to maintain even basic functionality as it retreated toward a defensive position near Kepler's Hold. Behind it, the battle continued to rage, but the character of the fight had fundamentally shifted, the Dominion's once overwhelming coordination replaced by scattered, desperate resistance that Kepler's Hold's remaining forces methodically dismantled over the following hour. Mara barely registered the passage of time as she and Reyes worked continuously to keep the reactor core stable, every passing minute bringing fresh strain as the station's defense grid remained at maximum output, supporting the ongoing counterattack against the fracturing Dominion remnants. It was only when Sutton's voice came through the comm system, carrying a tone Mara hadn't heard in 3 exhausting days, that she finally allowed herself to believe the worst might truly be over. "Enemy fleet in full retreat," Sutton reported, disbelief and exhaustion mingling audibly in her voice. "Repeat, remaining Dominion forces are withdrawing from the system. We actually held." A stunned silence fell across the integration lab, broken only by the steady hum of machinery and the sound of Mara's own ragged breathing. Beside her, Reyes sank back against his console, running a hand over his face, the accumulated exhaustion of the last 3 days finally catching up with him now that the immediate crisis had passed. "We did it," he said quietly, as though testing whether the words could possibly be true. Mara felt something break loose in her chest, a tangled knot of fear and exhaustion and disbelief, finally unraveling into something that might have been relief, might have been grief, might have been both at once, as the reality of survival settled over her. Hours later, once the immediate aftermath of the battle had been addressed, wounded tended to, damaged systems stabilized, Mara found herself once again on the observation deck, staring out at a starfield that looked, impossibly, exactly the same as it had 3 days earlier, despite everything that had happened beneath it. The Dominion fleet was gone, scattered fragments of their once massive formation retreating into the darkness, leaving behind a battlefield littered with the wreckage of both sides. Voss found her there sometime later, moving more slowly than before, a bandage wrapped around one arm, exhaustion etched deeply into every line of her face. She settled beside Mara without a word, both of them simply watching the quiet stars for a long moment before either spoke. "Your reactor held," Voss finally said. "Through everything we put it through, it held. That's not luck, that's skill. We had good teachers," Mara said, glancing sideways at her. "Or one, at least." A tired smile crossed Voss's face. "The reckoning needs extensive repairs. Weeks, maybe longer, before we're fully combat capable again." "You could stay," Mara said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "We could use the help rebuilding. And I think a lot of people here would like the chance to properly thank you." Voss considered this for a long moment, her gaze drifting out toward the stars, toward all the darkness and distance that still remained beyond this single, fragile victory. "We'll stay long enough to see the repairs through," she finally said. "But we can't stay forever, Mara. There are other places out there, other stations and colonies, facing exactly what you faced 3 days ago. We can't save everyone, but we can keep trying to save someone." Mara nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind those words, the endless, exhausting mission Voss and her crew had apparently carried for generations, moving from crisis to crisis, never able to rest, never able to call any single victory the end of their fight. "Then I hope you find them in time," Mara said quietly. "The next ones who need you." "So do I," Voss said. They sat together in comfortable silence after that, two survivors from very different journeys, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead, each carrying forward the weight of everything they'd lost and everything they'd managed, against all odds, to save. Behind them, Kepler's hold continued its slow recovery, refugees emerging cautiously from shelters, engineers beginning the long work of repairing what the battle had damaged, a station that had faced complete annihilation and found, instead, a way to endure. 3 weeks later, the Reckoning's repairs neared completion, and Mara stood once more in the same landing bay where she'd first stepped aboard the massive vessel, watching preparations for its departure with a strange mixture of gratitude and reluctance. Voss found her there, dressed once again in the same plain, practical uniform Mara had first seen her wearing. "You're really leaving," Mara said. "There's a distress signal 3 systems over," Voss said. "A colony smaller than this one, running out of time faster than you were. We can make it, if we leave now." Mara nodded, understanding completely, though something in her chest still ached at the thought of watching this ship disappear back into the void, uncertain if their paths would ever cross again. "Then go. Save them, the way you saved us." Voss studied her for a long moment, something warm and genuine passing across her usually guarded expression. "You could come with us, you know. We could use an engineer with your instincts." The offer hung in the air between them, tempting in ways Mara hadn't expected. But her gaze drifted past Voss, toward the station beyond the landing bay doors, toward the people who had rebuilt their lives here more than once, toward a community that still needed her, exactly as much as any distant colony might. "I belong here," Mara finally said. "But maybe, someday, our paths cross again." "Maybe," Voss agreed, extending a hand that Mara shook firmly. "Take care of this station, Mara Bennett. You've more than earned the chance to see it thrive." "Take care of yourself," Mara replied. "And whoever you find next." Voss offered one final nod before turning toward her waiting ship, disappearing through the landing bay's boarding ramp without further ceremony. The same quiet, purposeful movement Mara remembered from their very first meeting, 3 weeks earlier. Moments later, the Reckoning's massive engines began to hum with power, and the great ship slowly pulled away from Kepler's hold, its dark hull marked with the same slow, pulsing lights Mara had first seen from a shuttle window, back when hope had felt like the most foolish thing in the galaxy to hold on to. She watched until the ship became a distant point of light, then nothing at all, swallowed by the vast darkness it had emerged from 3 weeks before. Around her, Kepler's hold continued its steady work of recovery, a station that had stood at the edge of annihilation and found, through courage and desperate cooperation, a way to keep standing. Mara turned away from the empty space where the Reckoning had been and walked back into the station, toward the reactor core that still needed her attention, toward a life and a home she had nearly lost and now understood, more deeply than ever before, exactly how precious it truly was. Somewhere out in the vast darkness beyond Kepler's hold, the Reckoning continued its endless journey, carrying forward a mission that would never truly end, searching always for the next place, the next people. Standing at the edge of the same impossible odds, Kepler's hold had somehow overcome. And though Mara never saw Elena Voss again, she carried the memory of those 3 desperate days for the rest of her life, a reminder that even against the darkest odds, help could still arrive from the most unexpected corners of the void, and that courage, once kindled, had a way of outlasting even the longest night.